Hey, church family. It's Pastor Bruce here, the lead pastor of Antrim BIC Church, and I want to welcome you to our midweek recap. It's great having you here. Thanks for joining us. But if you haven't watched this past Sunday sermon, I want to encourage you to go back and watch that because this isn't going to make a whole lot of sense unless you've seen Sunday's sermon because we're going to recap here a little bit about what we talked about this past Sunday. So go ahead back, watch Ruth week 3, and then you can come back here for the Ruth week 3 recap. Man, that's a mouthful. But yeah, so if you come on back here, then you can join us for this recap. So, this past week we did cover Ruth chapter 3, and in that chapter we covered a whole host of different topics. But we look at the scene where Ruth is now coming to Boaz, and she is pursuing the Redeemer now, and that's where we find ourselves in Ruth chapter 3. As we talked about, we finished Ruth chapter 2 in this place where God is doing something. Ruth and Naomi especially acknowledge that, man, God has started to move. God is doing something special. God is doing something unique. They don't know what he's doing yet, but man, just the fact that Naomi picks up on this reality that God has brought Ruth to Boaz's field. Like of all the fields that she could have gone to, she ends up in the Redeemer's field. Now, it doesn't appear to us that Naomi knows that Boaz is not the closest redeemer, but he's a redeemer. And Ruth has found herself in his field. And not only has she found herself in the field, but she has found favor in his field. And so that's where we finish chapter 2 with. And so this past week, we come into this new scene. And like we talked about Sunday, that could have been enough. So many of us are used to, have grown accustomed to, and have allowed ourselves to settle for good enough. As we talked about, that could take place in many different ways. Like that car that you convince yourself is just fine, and as long as you don't turn left, or I know when we were growing up, our van had gotten some weird wiring things happened, and so every time you hit the brakes, the horn would just start honking for absolutely no reason. And so, everything was fine, right? And maybe it's a cell phone, that is cracked, and so you can't just swipe on that part of the screen. You convince yourself it's fine. I don't have to swipe anything. I'll just move everything to one side of the phone. And as we looked at Sunday, hopefully, we looked at that pair of underwear there, and every guy's got one of those in his. Maybe not every guy, but at least all the ones I know have one of those pairs in their drawers, and we've convinced ourselves there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly fine. So uh, it's easy to settle for good enough because of many reasons. We might be afraid of what would happen if we pursued better. We might be afraid of what would happen if we began to dream, we began to hope, we began to look for more. Because we don't want to be disappointed. Maybe we have a history of disappointment in our life. And so we don't want to think that it could get better or that it could be more than it is, because then we're opening ourselves up to being disappointed, to being let down, to being hurt. And so maybe whatever that situation, scenario is in your life, you've convinced yourself good enough is good enough. And so you've settled there. Hopefully, none of you were looking at your spouse when we were talking about settling, or else you probably got smacked. So, this idea that Satan will bring good into our life in order to distract us from God's best. That's one of the things we talked about, and I believe that is very, very true. It's easy to convince ourselves that, well, this is a good thing. I'm doing a good thing, so this can't be of Satan. This must be of God because it's a good thing. And Satan has just got us so confused on that. He's gotten us tricked, and we don't realize that we are following Satan's plan because it is a good thing because we haven't sought the Lord. I think back to when the Israelites are in the Exodus, and those people, the people group, come from very near to them, but they dress up and they act. They bring old wineskins. They put old clothing on themselves, and they act like they're from a very distant land, and they ask to make a treaty with them, and they don't consult God. It seems like a good thing, and so they don't consult God, and they settle for good and they end up getting tricked. And I wonder how many of us have gotten tricked by Satan by uh, seeing something that is good, being presented with an opportunity which is good, doing a good thing, and that's where we've kind of settled. And it consumes our time, it consumes our energy, it consumes our passion. Um, and all the while, there's that nagging feeling like, man, I don't know if this is God's best. Now, I said it jokingly, but Obviously, we're not talking about spouses. You don't get to remake that decision. If once you've made that decision, that's a lifelong commitment, and it becomes God's best because that's who you're married to. So you make that work. But when it comes to ministries, when it comes to where we're putting our time, our energy, our money into, into things, we have to consider and ask God, is this what you want? Is this your will for our life? It's one of the reasons why I believe strongly when we do membership here, which is an important part of a church, and we'll talk more on that in the coming days. But uh, when we do membership, I've always required people to know, okay, you've gone through the class, we've jumped through every hoop. The next step in membership is go and ask God, is this where you want me for this season? Because just because I believe that God is moving here at Antrim, just because I believe God is doing awesome things, because I believe there's a lot of opportunities to serve and be used by God here, does not mean that every single person's called here. So I want to make sure that they've heard from God. This is where they're to be, and because I want God's best for their life, and I hope you want God's best for your life as well. So I'm digressing. I'm going way down that rabbit trail. I really wanted to go further down that rabbit trail, but as you notice, my sermons in Ruth have already gone. I think the shortest one was like 43 minutes, 44 minutes. So it's been hard to condense all that I want to say into a 35 to 40-minute sermon, and I have failed miserably at that. But man, there's just so much here that's so rich. There's so many good things to talk about, and so the main theme of Sunday was don't settle for scraps when the Redeemer is calling us under his wings. This concept, this thought that we could be settling for scraps. Ruth and Naomi could have stayed in the field. They could have counted their blessings and said, "Man, we have everything we want. We never even dreamed that we'd be this far along, that we'd have this much blessing." And so they could have easily gotten distracted by good and said, "This is good enough," and could have stayed right there in that field season where many of us are. Many of you watching might be in your life right now. You're in the field. You've got what you want. You've got provision. You've got what you perceive to be your needs met, and so you don't want more. You're not pursuing the Redeemer because you have everything you need, and so we're provided for. We can settle down and just live a life, a field life, just being in the field. And I don't believe that's God's best for us. We must pursue the Redeemer. So the first thing we talked about is that provision can become a place where we settle, because we're provided for, because we have our physical needs met, because we have our emotional needs met, maybe our mental needs. We settle, and we don't continue to follow God and continue to follow his path for our life. Now, I think it's so interesting that as we talked about, this book of Ruth takes place in the midst of the judges, because what happens consistently to the nation of Israel while they're in this judges season is they find themselves being oppressed, so they call out to God. God comes and rescues them. He sends somebody to rescue them, sends a judge, rescues them from their current problem. They get provided for, they get provision, everything's good, and what do? They immediately turn their back on God. This cycle happens multiple times in the book of Judges, and it's that season of blessing is what ends up ruining them and tripping them up. And I think it's awesome that in the midst of all of that, there's one story in the midst of Judges where that doesn't happen, and that's the story of Ruth, where she doesn't allow the season of blessing to turn her eyes from God. She now pursues the Redeemer in the midst of a good season. So it can become a place where we settle, but it doesn't have to be. The second point we looked at is pursuing redemption requires humble obedience. This awesome obedience that Ruth has of saying to Naomi, "I'll do whatever you tell me to do." She's willing to do whatever Naomi lays out for her. That's like a blank check, man. I mean that's a big comment and trust that Ruth has in Naomi to say, "I'll do anything you tell me to do. I'm going to do it." And Ruth does it. I mean, she actually does that. So the humble obedience of Ruth is incredible. This reality that Naomi tells her to take this incredibly humiliating, humble posture at the feet of Boaz. And I just wonder, for some of I'm gonna call young ladies out right now. For some of the young ladies in our current culture, that's certainly not the message that's being told to you is you got to be the boss, and you can't let men walk all over you, and you got to be super tough, and while some of that is good, and I believe some of that, it can almost create this like you never humble yourself for a man, you never humble yourself in the midst of that relationship. You always got to be in control, and you always got to be the boss, and you always got to push this all this feminist garbage that's out there. With some of it is good, certainly, obviously, but this idea that women don't submit, this idea that we don't submit to one another, that's the garbage part. And I would encourage you, whether you're a young man or a young woman, to consider Ruth's humble posture that she takes here. How she, again, it's humiliating. She goes and she uncovers his feet. She lays at his dirty feet while he's taking a snooze, on the barley after the harvest. He's enjoyed himself. He's had a good night. He's having a great season, and she just is there, laying at his feet. uh, Man, it's so amazing to see this level of humble obedience that she has, and I know that we can learn a lot from this. Young men, young women alike, old men, old women, all of us can learn from this humble obedience that Ruth portrays and displays here. So that was our second point. Point number three: redemption begins when we come to the Redeemer's feet. This is where redemption really begins. Until this point, Boaz does not know that Ruth is pursuing redemption. He does not know that that is something on her heart. It's when she takes this humble posture, and you just wonder, because we don't have everything that's spelled out for us in the story. What would happen if Ruth would have just approached him in the field? What if Ruth would have just walked up to him and said, "Hey, you're a redeemer. You should redeem me." We don't know how Boaz would have responded in the midst of that, but we do know how he responds to her humble approach. This, bowing her face to the ground, and she's just such a humble woman, and she pursues the Redeemer in a humble way, and requests that he fulfill his role as Redeemer. And it's this point where the redemption begins. I mean, certainly the desire for redemption is there, but it doesn't begin until she makes the request, until she comes humbly and makes that request. Um, Point number four: a true Redeemer responds with grace and integrity. See, that's the beautiful thing about Jesus. Boaz is a picture of Jesus, but he's not Jesus. And while Boaz's character seems to be, flawless here in the book of Ruth, we don't see anything negative about Boaz. He does everything upright and with integrity. Um, Even more so, our Redeemer Jesus is that much more beautiful and amazing, and worthy for us to put our trust into. Certainly, if we're uh, trusting in Him for our eternity, we can absolutely trust Him for our today, or for our job, or for our kids, or any of the other areas He's calling us to trust Him in. I think it's ridiculous that we would trust Christ with our eternity, but not with our children, or not with our financial situation. Well, I can't tithe because I just don't have enough money. I don't trust you, God, that you'll provide for me, so I'm going to withhold the very thing that you told me to do. And to me, that's just ludicrous that we would say, well, yeah, but my eternal security is in Jesus. I just don't trust Him, to provide for me financially. How crazy is that? He is a redeemer that is full of integrity, that is full of grace, and we can put all of our trust in him. Point number five: redemption sends us home with hope before the story is finished. We finish Ruth chapter 3. Everything is not done. Everything has not been accomplished. Boaz has made a commitment, and Ruth has come home not empty-handed, but with more barley. And yet the story has not reached its conclusion. Matter of fact, this coming week, hope you'll join us for it as we finish out our Ruth series, as we cover Ruth chapter 4. So this is an amazing story. Up until this point, we have some of these amazing things happening, amazing characters in Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz, and I'm excited. I mean, certainly you don't need to wait until Sunday to find out what happens, because you're supposed to be reading, Ruth chapter 4 this week. So I encourage you to do so. Be reading Ruth chapter 4. But that last point, that redemption sends us home with hope before the story is finished. Um, I hope we live in hope. I hope each and every day of our life is lived with hope, because of our hope in our Redeemer, because we know who Jesus is, because we know what He's done for us. We can live with hope, and as we talked about Sunday, He's coming back. So we get to live with multiple areas of hope, not just for eternal salvation, but knowing that Christ is going to come and he's going to retrieve his bride. What a beautiful thing in that he has redeemed us. He's done everything necessary. There is no closer redeemer. It doesn't matter that Satan has claimed you or Satan tried to put a claim on you. God is more powerful than him, and he will always win in that battle. And so put your trust in Jesus, put your trust in the Redeemer, and come under his wings, because that's what he wants. Not to settle for scraps, but to come under the Redeemer's wings. He wants to redeem us. Everything has been done. Everything has been set up. We simply need to step into it. And that requires nothing on our part but to simply submit. And that's the life of submission that we talked about on Sunday. Um, I hope you caught our little my little rabbit trail on the Kanaf and that amazing correlation in the book of Ruth and the story of the woman and the issue of blood. I think it's amazing. It blows my mind as I look at that correlation between that. You probably don't have that in your Bibles, not probably not noting that story of the woman with the issue of blood. But man, to me, it's so powerful how it makes you wonder, right? Did the woman with the issue of blood, did she hear? Did she read? Where it says that there will be healing in his wings in Malachi. Did she read that? And she would have known and made that connection that it's talking not just about wings, but about the fringe of a garment. Is that why she touched Jesus, the fringe of Jesus' garment? We don't know. It doesn't tell us that, but it's amazing just to look at and wonder that um, how much it correlates with the book of Ruth, and even down to Jesus calling her daughter and Boaz calling her daughter, and wanting to be covered. So amazing stuff. I love nerding out and going down those rabbit trails. To me, it's amazing stuff, and I love the richness of the Word of God, and I encourage you to do the same. The chapter 4 of Ruth is an awesome chapter. Things come to a conclusion. We find out not only does Boaz follow through on what he said, but he ends up being the grandfather of David, and how cool is that? So I hope you'll join us as we finish out the book of Ruth this coming week. I hope that you are considering in your own life where you may have been settling for scraps. You may have been settling for good when God is calling you to great. I truly believe God was speaking on Sunday to many of you, telling you that you're settling and you're not pursuing His best for your life. I don't think that was a message just for me. Like I said, usually 99.9% of the time, what I'm preaching on Sunday is because God's putting his hand on that in my life. I'm wrestling with him over these things. There's definitely areas in my life where I'm settling for scraps instead of, coming under the wings of the Redeemer in certain ways. And I've been challenged personally by that. And I hope you are as well. And just to have the humility to admit, that this is where I've settled. This is where I have accepted less than what God wants for me. And again, that when we say God's best, it doesn't mean that you're going to be financially, successful, or everything, your business ventures are all going to turn out and all of that stuff. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about his best, and his best for your life might be suffering. It might be difficult. It might be sacrificing. Most likely it's going to be all those things. It's going to be uh, pull you out of your comfort zone, and he's going to call you to do things that you don't necessarily want to do, but in that you'll meet him and you'll walk with him, and it'll be amazing, and you wouldn't want to change it for the world. So I encourage you to consider that, and to make some commitments to not settle, to take that next obedient step of faith and step into what God has for you. So again, this Sunday, 8 o'clock and 10:45 are our service times. And at 9:30, we have our Sunday school hour, which we hope you'll join us for. Jump into a Sunday school class. If you need help with that, reach out to us, and we will let you know. We'll give you a hand in that. We'll let you know what classes are available and get you plugged into a Sunday school. But again, 8 o'clock, 10:45 for our service times, and we will be finishing out the book of Ruth and into chapter 4 and finalizing our sermon series. It's been a blessing. I've really enjoyed the book of Ruth. I'm excited for what God has for us next. And you'll just have to wait and find out what that's going to be, but it's going to be good. We're going to be jumping into another book of the Bible here right after Father's Day. So God bless you all. Have a great week. Don't settle, but come under the Redeemer's wings and join us this coming Sunday. And don't forget, we also have the picnic. So I hope you signed up for the picnic that we have, the baptism and the picnic at the pond. And we're going to be enjoying that as well Sunday afternoon. God bless you all, and hope to see you Sunday.